Okay, here I am. I'm going to actually start this presentation without finishing it because I just realized that it's going to take more than 4 hours actually. It's really, really long. And I have to connect a lot of the concepts, so I might as well start someday, and why not today? Even though I'm super busy. I really want to explain this stuff in a way that helps people in some way, I suppose. Even though I don't know who's gonna watch it, and maybe I'll translate it because I like languages and I want the highest amount of people to listen to my ideas. One of the names, as I said in the preview of this presentation of this very presentation, is actually depression. Yeah, that's the name of of the presentation I wanted to give it to, because in general it's like antidepressant kind of presentation. In reality, it might depress you because I say some kind of harsh things about reality, but always trying to be objective. And also my worry comes from a lot of a perception of very negative perception of digital social media, of how maybe it turns people a little bit upside down, and make them realize that the world is actually worse than it actually is. Maybe some kind of brainwashing. And I will get into the details later on, but the real essence of this presentation is actually existence. So, what is existence, and what, as a human, what more or less what are the expectations to find in this world? It seems banal, but in reality, it has a very deep concept within. And I think I can start talking about, well, epistemology, which is the idea that a lot of the ancient Greek philosophers talked about, which is how do people get any sort of knowledge, and how valid is that knowledge. And you have experimentalists, how do you call them? Experientism. I don't remember exactly the name. And people that idealists, and not in the modern sense, but in the sense of existence is about ideas, not so much about the things that you observe. And there are other hedonists, which is not the same as today's hedonists, but it's still similar. There are Stoics, there are Sophists, and so on. There are different schools of thought that have appeared throughout the ages and have been recorded through ancient written history. But I'm going to maybe give it a modern twist and maybe explain a little bit. Always taking into consideration that I'm not a specialist in any of these fields, but I'm just kind of an enthusiast and read stuff. So there's a guy called Aristotle. Was an ancient philosopher, very famous, right? In ancient Greece, pretty much 300 years before the Common Era. He started to see that the world was really kind of classified, in at least in the human world. We classified stuff in different categories, and those categories were not necessarily clear cut. Some of them were blurry, some of them were in the gray area, and so on. And so he started to think, what is something, right? How can you say that, for example, a wall is a wall, or sand is sand? And so he said, I think this is not exactly what Aristotle said, but this is a modern version of what he said. Is like, if a duck quacks like a duck, moves like a duck, flies like a duck, dives in the water like a duck, eats like a duck, breathes like a duck, avoids being hunted by like a duck, and so on and on and on, then it is a duck, right? So if it has all the characteristics of that thing, then it means it's that thing. And a modern version of it is like labels. Well, some people like to attach simple labels to things and people. In reality, there's nuisance there's nuance in the meaning of what we actually refer to, and we don't have time to explain the entire entity that we're explaining. So in this case, we see here in this presentation the dragonfly. The dragonfly is a concept. It's a very complex insect actually, and it has much wider view than humans, and it has a very different worldview than humans because it has a different brain. Like it's very tiny. It's very instinctive and needs to find food as soon as possible. It doesn't last for long. Just as an example, the modern fly, okay, the common fly, what we call fruit flies, last for a few days. I mean, maybe 2 days. And so they have to quickly find food and quickly reproduce before they die. Otherwise, they don't pass the genes to the next generation. Neither do their offspring, what scientists would call reproductive success. So they have very different societies, and you would have to study them for a long time to really understand them. And we classify them as dragonflies because of their characteristics. They have 4 wings, 6 legs. They have a long tail. They have a very ample angular sight and so on. So this is sort of a classification and also trying to understand that the firefly has a very different worldview because of the characteristics of the the dragonfly. And then we have something called entropy. Okay, so physicists know this. This is, correct me if I'm wrong, the second law of thermodynamics. And the idea that some professors use is the water in the glass, right? If you fill with a pitcher a glass of water with water, and it doesn't brim to the point of dripping, it's fine. It's not going to move for a wave. But if it starts to drip and it starts to spill outside of the glass of water, you will see that it will be very difficult to pick that water up and put it back in another glass. So that concept of unreversibility of a phenomenon, of an action, is sort of an anthropic concept. Another example of it is, a piece of ice that is on the floor, and it starts to melt. Okay, it's not that the piece of ice starts to infect or kind of transmit the coldness to the room, but it's the other way around. The room starts to transmit the heat to the ice cube, and it starts to melt. Basically, because the atoms of the surrounding environment are moving around quickly. The electrons around the atoms are moving around quickly, while in the ice cube it's not. Okay, so it kind of infects with the dynamics of the environment into the object in question, the ice cube. And that's pretty much universal in nature. Like, for example, we age because DNA has something called telomeres, and the telomeres are basically the tip points that are like a zipper on the bottom, right? Or like the brim of a pair of pants. Okay, so it starts to deteriorate, and then it starts to open up. It starts to how do you call it? To break or to open up. The little filaments, the little threads. And so that phenomenon of the telomere in the DNA, which is a helix, starts to open up, and the small pieces of amino acids. Adenine, cytosine, guanine, and uracil and RNA, and I always forget the components of a DNA. When you remember the RNA ones, or similar, it just changes one amino acid. So all of those start to move around and lose information because they're not attached anymore to the helix of the chromosome, and so it starts to deteriorate. And when cells reproduce it, they start to reproduce ineffectively. So that's aging basically, and that's another example of entropy. This is another example of entropy. I just recently took a picture of this card, just denotes how antiquated I am. Yeah, I don't use digital stuff although I think it's more reliable to have it on a piece of paper. But with time, I have to change it because of entropy. It starts to just grabbing it starts to rip apart, and you see clearly that. The piece of paper doesn't want to last for long. Maybe I've had it for 2 years and it's already like that. It's tainted and ripped apart. And so, ontologically speaking, we describe stuff first in general terms, and then we go into the details. And this is also applied to education in general. If you have something abstract or something that for which people don't have experience, and you start to apply a lot of details, then you're going the wrong way because you still don't have the general shape. And so pedagogically, but also even in a philosophical way, like starting anything really, a project and so on, you need to first give the general shape and then go into the details, which is what this man is doing. He's giving the general shape. Maybe he's creating a jar, or maybe it's the upper side of a hair of a Greek woman trying to imitate ancient Greek statues or so on. And so he already gave some sort of general shape, and then he will go with a smaller stencil, smaller scalpel, to do the details of the face, for example. And that's ontologically a good idea, especially when describing something that is complex, like most things are, right? And so when I was a kid, I remember my family members in general, they used to complain that I smelled the food. And it's considered perhaps as a lack of etiquette or lack of manners, because you're suggesting that they're giving you poisoned food or rotten food. But in reality, it's an evolutionary trait, right, that allows people to find if the actual food is rotten. And not because you don't trust the person that gave you the food, but because there are millions of ways that the food can be wrong, and the person that cooked it didn't find out. So it's not intentional necessarily. And the people that do that, probably in the past reproduced more and had more children because they, they were wise enough to know that the food wasn't rotten by first smelling it and then eating them, right? And so, I know, in my defense, right, I actually was right smelling the food, because it makes you more capable of surviving. It increases the chances. And, you have to classify food as rotten or not rotten. And if it's, stinks because it's chou tofu or, stinky tofu, the thing they eat in China and Taiwan, the rotten, it's not rotten, sorry, it's like a fermented, made of fermented soy tofu, and then they boil it and it smells like stinky feet, okay? Or something like French cheese, right? So, except with that, because it's, the fermentation is what makes it stink, not dangerous bacteria or fungi. Then you can be sure that it has some problems if it's not, a traditional food with fermented tradition. And then we can go with the details of alcoholic beverages, which I don't drink for obvious reasons anyway. So classifying stuff leads to common traits, right? You see that some stuff have similar traits, right? Like humans, within humans, individuals have common traits, like they have 5 fingers, right? And so in this case, because I don't just want to talk, right? I want people maybe to participate, although I have like 5 viewers for every video I make. Maybe I have to become a marketer so I can get more views. In this case, I want you to think, you the viewer, to think about the common traits that I show here, about the entities that I show you here. So the first one is a car, right? You can say it's a van, but in more general terms, a car, 4 wheels, etc. Then a toilet, right? Typical Western toilet. Then on the lower left, there's a group of bottles and cups of different alcoholic beverages like beer, wine, tequila maybe. I don't know. I'm not an expert in the field. All sorts of vodka. I don't know. You can probably better than I do about it. And then the second the right lower one is a school, a typical school, and the kids are learning the abacus. Okay. So what do these 4 entities have in common? It's open to discussion, but I want you to think about it, right? Different people will come with different answers, obviously, and that's nice. People have originality, they have their individual minds. And what do those previously shown entities have in common with this one? A bed, a normal Western bed. So again, I leave it as a homework, maybe, and or if you want to answer it now on the comment section or whatever. And that's just to cultivate creativity, to cultivate lateral thoughts, brain what do you call it? Brainstorming. Okay, it doesn't have to be. There's no correct answer, and that's how tests should be. Right? No correct answer, just discuss about the ideas. And so this is there have to be common traits, and I cannot tell. I will tell you later, but I won't tell you when, and maybe you won't even find out when I have told you. It would be kind of in a subliminal way or something like that. Anyway, there are common traits. Trust me. And then there are common traits in these people, right? So I admire, the 4 of them because they have certain characteristics, right? So the first one at the top left is Jared Diamond, which wrote a famous book about civilizations, which is called Guns, Germs, and Steel. And Noam Chomsky, which is a famous linguist and also political activist. And then Harari, he also wrote a book I read. Actually, he's the only one whose book I have read. Is called... I read one of his books. It's called Human History, the history of humankind, a small story of humankind. I don't remember exactly, but it's a very good book. And then Nicolas Nassim Taleb, which is a statistician, probabilist, and mathematician, and he was a trader and so on. So I don't agree with his. He's kind of ambiguous in morality, but he's very smart in the way he explains statistics and probability and how and what we were talking about. Ontological and epistemology happens. How we classify stuff and how we acquire knowledge. So. In this presentation, I have to warn you that I'm a very moralist person, right? But I have to discipline myself, and I will not talk much about morality, but what's right or wrong. But just try to be objective until the end, because in the ending part, I will give advice, and I will try to use more moralistic language, and I use universal morality. So I talk in a way that I assume certain axioms, like, for example, people shouldn't be hurt, If there's a government and it's not a corrupt government. Like if you buy food, you're not buying rotten food, right? You're buying food that you can eat. That's why you're paying it with your time investment in whatever, right? That goes to something else, right? Goes, you have capital or whatever, and you exchange it for a little bit of food. I mean, I assume it's authentic, right? The food is, and the trade is authentic. So that's a kind of universal morality. I don't want stupid, comments about, people are just fucking animals, and there's a hierarchy, and one wants to climb up the ladder, and in the climbing the ladder he has to kill or deceive or whatever. No, I'm not talking about that. I mean, otherwise I don't have time to always remind people it's not that, right, that I'm referring to. But I will talk about morality specifically, and in general it's going to have a moralistic topic, but really trying to be objective. And at the end, I'm just going to leave that aside. I'm going to say what I really think, from my perspective, what is right and wrong in general terms. Obviously, that's very general and perhaps difficult to do, to pinpoint at the things that I believe to be relevant. And then, that means that I will use normative language. That is, I will not prescribe stuff like a doctor that prescribes some medicine. I will just simply use objective language as much as I can. And then I assume also common sense. Like if I say 11, right, and the governmental office you're applying to or you want to go to, in its website or in a newspaper or whatever announcement, it's written 11. It means 11 a.m., not 11 p.m. because of common sense. At 11 p.m., people are sleeping, and generally the government doesn't work at that time unless it's a spying agency or something like that. But generally, most offices work in the morning and in the afternoon a little bit. But if it's a governmental office, it's generally in the morning, right? And so it assumes common sense that the world you live in, mostly westernized, urbanite cities, and context obviously matters, right? I mean, you can't put in a vacuum something. It always combines with something else, and alone just doesn't make any sense to analyze it. So you will always make me make examples with different combinations. It's impossible to make all the possible combinations, but at least some combinations to give the general feeling for it. Okay, so we have Immanuel Kant's empiricism, what I was talking at the beginning, which I couldn't pronounce. Which is the idea that the knowledge comes from experiences, not so much from ideas, although ideas come from experience, obviously. And so I'm an empiricist myself, and I like the idea of Immanuel Kant's empiricism. The way they explain it, especially in philosophy, it's too convoluted in my opinion, but it's probably because of the huge amount of problems with translations and interpretations of great minds. So I'm not capable of understanding what was it, English, ancient no, that's probably Old English or Middle English or medieval English, right? Oh no, he was German, so he was medieval. He was using late medieval German. Okay, so and when you translate it, all the translation problems, misinterpretations, and so on. All knowledge is derived from experience. That's the idea of empiricism. And then Albert Einstein said imagination is more important than knowledge. So it's really not experience. It's something that happens in our brains, the kind of neural networks that activate back and forth to reinforce a certain idea, but then it combines in different ways to create new worlds, and that's what imagination really is, and not necessarily entire worlds, but things or entities that live in our minds. So it's a combination of empiricism and idealism, if you want to look at that way. At that way, and the ideas are let's say, not ideas not extracted from experience are probably come from imagination, or unfortunately from indoctrination. And there is a tendency to believe that all the people have the same abilities, but it's not true at all. I mean, at all. Some people are dyslexic, for example. They cannot speak in a coherent way because they have some damage in the temporal lobes, for example, or some mental illness, or perhaps they're nervous and so on, right? So if I were in front of millions of people in a theater or whatever, or thousands of people, or the TV transmitting in real time what I'm saying, I would get a little bit more nervous, right? Because of the perception of the self-consciousness of me making a mistake and being observed by a lot of people that might bully my way of talking, or the things that I'm saying. So a lot of things are in place, and in cases of very smart people like Donald Knuth, right, where he in one interview he says that he couldn't visualize 3D objects. He had to actually use a 3D application like 3D Studio Max or Blender 3D or Lightwave 3D. All of those applications in a computer for 3D graphics. Just reminds me of how different brains operate. Like, he's a genius, basically, of computer science, and yet he cannot visualize 3D objects. So he's good at math, he's good at maybe 2D geometry, but if he wants to visualize 3D stuff, he has to go to a computer and, or he has to visualize it physically, and start to turn it around. And that's something that maybe most people don't suffer from, but this very smart person does. And this is just one example. And then there are cognitive disabilities and so on. Donald Knuth definitely doesn't have cognitive disabilities, but he admitted to have this 3D object agnosticism, can we call it, or obliviousness. So then IQ, which is something that people tend to gravitate towards when they want to talk about intelligence, but I think it's a mistake, is kind of a thing that people invented in the early 20th century. I think it was Binet. I don't know how to pronounce his name in French. Binet in English, I suppose. He invented these tests to see if kids were able to go through school, because some schools are too difficult for them or not adequate for them. And so Binet wanted to see if there were deficiencies in the way the kids solve problems. So really, IQs are not, indicators of high intelligence. I think they might tell you a little bit about some talents. Like, for example, some people are really fast at computing stuff and doing calculations and solving logical problems. So if you're fast at that, your IQ will be very, very high. But this is not intelligence, really. I mean, I would say that depth of thought is much more important than quickness or speed. Because just think about it. I mean, if you say 2 + 4 is 8, right? Very quickly, it doesn't make the answer better. It actually you just said a wrong answer more quickly. And even if you get it right, saying 4 + 4 is 8 is not very insightful. And so a lot of the things in IQ tests are like that. I would say a literary critique is much more indicative of someone's intelligence than IQ tests. But it's a standard test that can detect deficiencies in mathematics or even in language, like what I was saying. Dyslexia can be detected in an IQ test. And so obviously intelligent people are better at understanding and solving problems and so on. This is kind of commonsensical. And then there's the idea of willingness to learn. Like, you cannot make people uh, curious. They have to be curious, right? You can't make people read stuff. They have to be willing to do it. So that's why some schools don't make kids read. I remember I did have a literature teacher that made us read some books, and we could choose from a group of books which she had kind of read. And I remember that was a good technique, but I think that giving students the ability to choose whatever topic they want is much more effective, because they can actually read topics they're interested in. They will absorb that information much more quickly. So just as an example, if you're interested in computer programming, just read a programming book, right? Not ancient, ways of building, you know, olive squashers. I don't remember the name of the thing, but ancient machines. It's not. I mean, if you're interested in history, obviously, but if not, if you're interested in modern computers, then you got to get the book about modern computers, right? It's pretty commonsensical again. And there are two poles in terms of education. There are people that believe that intelligence is fixed, and there is a group of people that think that it can grow. So the growth mindset is the good one, right? The one I support, although I said I wasn't going to give value judgments. But it's kind of hard to avoid that. The growth mindset means that people think that that one can learn and become better at something. While the fixed mindset is more like, oh, you have an IQ of 80, you're stupid forever, right? And so, it also, it's a pole. There are two poles. It's in between. There are in betweens. And then psychologists, this is an annoying part of scientists and people that study. And sometimes when they don't know something, instead of saying I don't know, they use terms that actually denote that they don't know, and they use pretty much superstition to explain it. So the equivalent of religious people saying, "Oh, it's God's will," right? It's nice. I mean, they're religious. They have their beliefs, but it's inaccurate. It's superstitious. So it's a little bit harmful in that sense, because it promotes superstition. So I'm always going to be against superstition. And but don't believe that only religious people have that. So psychologists say, when they don't say I don't know, they mean they don't know. They say, they don't say I don't know. They say it's subconscious. So they say, oh, he's a serial killer. How do you know? Oh, it's the subconscious. His subconscious body language. Gabriel is a serial killer because he's moving, his hands in a serial killer way. He just doesn't know because it's all subconscious. It's scary. So physicists don't know, so they say it's dark matter, right? So people can get away with technical terms, saying technical terms, and then they sound professional, like, wow, I failed, And so, but I use the technical terms, and now it's, you still got to pay me for my studies because, because I use the word that sounds very technical, very cool, but I don't know what the hell I'm talking about, or my calculations were wrong, and so I have to use a technical term. So that they keep giving me, as a scientist, they keep giving me budgets, to keep studying. And then theologians say, it's God, like what I was saying about religious people. Or if it's good, it's God. And if it's bad, they say it's the devil, right? Spiritualists, they say it's the aura or it's the energies. You keep listening to these people without a lot of education, unfortunately, that they try to justify their ignorance with cool words like energies, spiritual, aura, the karma, all that nonsensical stuff. And then biologists say it's nature, right? And so it's nature, not in the positive sense, right? It's it's nature in the sense that people are cruel. Oh, it's nature. Whatever the fuck. Evolution, man. Evolution. Social Darwinism, man. So, okay. Ugly face of this devilish, murderous puppet and famous Chucky, right? If you have been hegemonized, westernly hegemonized by United States culture, you know who this is, right? Like I was, this is a terroristic, puppet that kills people for fun or whatever. It has psycho, sadistic killer. I don't remember. I've never seen any of its movies. But the reason why I put that picture over there is because it represents horror, right? And I wanted to talk about horror. That this doesn't cause as much horror as what I'm about to explain. One of the worst nightmares I've ever had. It was actually in the hills. I don't remember. You know how dreams are. They're not exactly specific. They're very general. And there were some hills, and I was walking down a very lonely street. So I was kind of isolated, and there was a rocky road to the right, and I crossed to the right, and then I see some people, villagers, and at the end I see some like the figures of my parents, right? So my mother and my father, and once I start to talk to them, I start to see something fishy, right? And at the end, I realized that they're not my true parents. They were fake parents. And then I didn't understand why it was so at the beginning, maybe in the moment that I started to feel that terror, why it was so terrorizing. And then I realized, well, that's really me. I've always been terrorized by non-authentic sources, right? Like people lying, people manipulating, trying to convey something that is not real, hypocrisy and so on. And that's something that was authentic, and the nightmare really conveyed perfectly. You don't need a psychopathic, sadistic puppet with a knife persecuting you to feel that horror. You just need some concepts, right? Like very general concepts about manipulation. So that in that dream, the people were not really my parents. They were pretending to be my parents. And it has applied even today, right? The idea of logical fallacies, like the idea of not being able to solve problems and to be easily duped or dupe other people, has always terrorized me. And so Chucky pretty much represents the horror that I feel when confronted with these kinds of problems. And this is the Death Valley. Sorry, not the Death Valley. The Uncanny Valley. It's a term that a lot of artists use to refer to something similar to what I just said. The idea of something appearing authentic but not being, and slowly realizing it's not authentic. Like in the case of the nightmare, my parents slowly becoming from authentic parents to fake parents. That sensation of deceit, that you were initially duped and then you slowly realize you were duped, is that kind of weird sensation of horror. And artists know it very well because they create 3D, hyper-realistic 3D graphics, like this picture of this character in Animatrix, where he looks very realistic, but maybe here in the picture you don't notice it really well, but if you watch the movie, you will see his eyes are not reflected as the real eyes of people, and then the shading is a little bit shady, and the lighting is, you can see that's not reflecting the light as it would in reality. So you realize it's not real. You were duped into believing it was a real picture or a real actor, and then you fall into the uncanny valley, right? That sensation of being duped into believing something authentic is not actually something actually spurious. Is actually not authentic. And then we have again the creepy idea of when somebody like the Chucky picture, right? This is explicitly harmful, right? He has a knife and he's charging the knife. He's kind of putting it backwards so he can have the impetus, right? He can have the momentum to stab. So that's overtly harmful, overtly threatening. However, this one is ambiguous, so this is creepier, right? Because this one is a bunny that is supposed to be nice and it's supposed to be friendly with kids, and in reality has a very ambiguous face in which he's kind of, you don't know if he's laughing or he is concocting something bad, and the kid doesn't know it because he's clueless. But it's very creepy, right? And this sensation of again ambiguity is also another source of terror in my case, right? But many people have different perspectives on this, and of course, this is all about authenticity of the knowledge that you have. And so, how to learn something, comes from a sustained effort. It doesn't come immediately, really, because the neurons make pathways that can take long to create, more or less like a real path, a road or whatever. It takes time to open up the space and then build with concrete or asphalt or whatever. And the same with the neurons. The pathways go from one way to the other and create different ideas, and that in a prolonged sense, if it repeats a lot of times, then the brain considers it important, and then it stores the memory. And so the prolonged effort, sustained effort for a long time, and also effort that is authentic, that is earnest, will lead to learning. And also there's genetic predisposition, like some people with ADHD, right, with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder might not be attracted to things that require a long time to learn, like for example physics or learning maybe agriculture, engineering or whatever. And so they might want to become soccer players or dancers, right? So there's genetic predisposition for different paths in life and careers and so on. And then obviously if a person lives in a country where there is not enough support for intellectual endeavors, he will have to become rebellious, right? Otherwise, he will not make it, or she will not make it to make a living out of that. As a good example was Albert Einstein, who was persecuted because he was a Ashkenazi in beginning of 20th century Europe, and so they were persecuted. The Nazis arrived there and they started to burn books and destroy his office and so on. And so he had to flee, and then he made a living in the United States, and he was surprised by the stupidity of people and the drama of the atomic bomb era, and all of that. He had to fight a lot of stuff, and not only in academically, but also in the environment, in the just living environment he had to be exposed to, is a good example of a rebelliousness, right? Had he stayed there and submitted to the Nazis, he would be dead or something like that, right? And then we have the archer versus scout mentalities. So the archer is the one that points at an ideology, and he always tries to make his point valid, irrespective of reality, right? So he kind of twists reality to fit in his ideology. And the scout is more like an open-minded person that goes out and sees what's out there and tries to adapt to what reality is. Right. So a scout is more of a critical thinker, and he takes different perspectives and makes his own reasoning around those perspectives without being, internalizing ideologies. So clearly, I'm already suggesting which one is better, but again, I'm not supposed to give value judgments. And then there's the descriptive versus prescriptive language. What I was just explaining right now, that I have to use descriptive language, not give you the recipe for success or anything like that. So that's the fact-value distinction. It's also called the is-ought problem. You can search it on the internet. It's vast. There are a lot of discussions about it. And one of the many philosophers that talked about it was Hume, but also Immanuel Kant. There are many other philosophers, and even ancient ones. And so human nature, is there human nature? I don't think so. I think that there are individual natures. So every person has its nature, but there are biological natures. There's a biological nature. Like if you don't eat, you die. You don't drink water, you die. But apart from that, the personality is unique, or it should be, maybe. I'm too optimistic about that. Filter out the garbage, right? You don't take the garbage, you actually put it away, and you only take the valuable stuff, the relevant info, and that's for education, right? Then there's reasoning, right? Posteriori means you first get the examples, then you get the generalization, and a priori is first you get the generalization, right? The axioms, and then you get the examples. I think that a posteriori is much better type of teaching and learning, and again, I shouldn't be giving value judgments, but the a posteriori seems to be the one that works in most people, right? You get a lot of examples, then they kind of mush in together all the ideas into one consolidated abstract idea. It's similar to what I was saying at the beginning, right? Find the common traits of these different entities. That's a posteriori reasoning exercise. Then you have figures of speech which are not understood, actually. People, for example, that have autism do not understand sarcasm, okay, or parody, right? So it might be dangerous to be sarcastic in front of an autistic person, or people with schizophrenia, or they don't understand. Where's the other one? Huffington's disease. I think they don't understand danger. So when there's danger, they kind of don't get it. Like, so for example, they don't distinguish between an angry face and a happy face, and so on. So a metaphor, right, to express something from abstract concepts to concrete ones. Proverbs. Proverbs are not like aphorisms, right, that transmit some kind of folkloric wisdom against the scientific wisdom, which is not necessarily always scientific, even though they call it that way. Some people use science as a tool for convincing people. And remember, science is about experimentation and verifying the measurable stuff, not about appending the science label and then selling your ideas. That's corrupt science. And so people internalize ideologies, okay? So a lot of take for example the economic system, whatever it is, people printing money. In the old days, it was minting money, right? There were coins that the king minted, and then they trusted the king that represented the labor of his people, and then people traded. And if it was a famous token and famous currency, that people even outside his kingdom would want to use it just to trade with them from time to time. And a lot of free charge stuff today are not really free of charge, but they are actually very expensive because you're paying with your mind, right? Like Facebook, YouTube, anything that uses ads to get and make profit. And generally is it's cliche to say it now, but you become the product. They sell your information to people that are willing to pay for your attention, like people that want to sell you something, marketers. Okay, and so it's kind of dangerous because if you're not really applying critical thinking, you're gonna believe very stupid stuff, and it happens. I've seen people believing very stupid stuff, especially on the internet. Chomsky and language as a tool for thought, not only communication. Right. This is something I don't agree with Chomsky actually, even though he's one of the very few people that actually I agree with almost entirely, except some small details. This is one of the things I don't agree, mainly because I'm a little bit biased in the sense that I don't think that that's how my brain works. I mean, I speak five natural languages, but I think I do use a mental language that then I translate to any of the other languages. And the more I speak natural language, the more it becomes natural. I mean, the more it becomes second thought, not because it's the thing that makes language work in the temporal lobes, or what are the areas of the Goki area? I don't remember the name right now. The part where auditory input and expressive output is processed. I think that there is the memory is used in ways in which the brain takes that memories and then translates it into natural language, but the let's say the raw language of the brain is definitely doesn't look like a natural language, like it doesn't look like English, for example. But it's still considered a language in the sense that you could, if you could train yourself to read the neurons, you would actually be able to communicate with that person, like for example with MRIs or encephalograms. And so words, a lot of manipulative people use words that should be used more often. Remember, should indicates prescriptive, right? Are deterred. Like for example, I don't know. You pick your favorite example. I'll pick mine. The idea of freedom, right? It's kind of abused a lot, and so it's kind of like George Orwell, right? What he said about the words that are mostly more used or used more often are the ones that benefit their masters, and like what I was saying, if they say freedom, it's maybe on TV you say, oh, freedom means go and invade countries that have been exploited by the people that are using the word freedom. And then we have the great Confucius, which says, that's a long ancient Chinese proverb, which means that basically, extracting information that I could get from it is that students can infer. You don't have to give them the whole information. If from one you get three. This is pretty much what Confucius said. So it's again repeating the idea of inference and trying to get information not from complete knowledge but incomplete knowledge. So the things that haven't happened, or the hypothetical things, or the things that have not survived, or the things that in a alternative timeline would have happened. And then you have national identity versus communal identity. Very different. The national identity is completely fake, and communal identity is authentic. So people might want to gather because of common interests, or because of common kinship, or because of common enemies. And in national identity is mostly common enemies and fear of invasions and so on. But it's weird because, in a nation there could be very, very bad apples, and you still have to collaborate with them because it's a commercial world. but at the same time, you know that it's necessary, but it's kind of you have to dodge bullets, so to speak. And then the idea of tabula rasa, right? The idea that there's a blank slate and that we are just brainwashable, and whatever is told to us, we have to do it, or we would do it if people insisted upon it, is very flimsy. I don't think it holds any waters. And the biological determinism is the other side of the pole, which means that there's nothing we can do about it. We just have to, follow our instincts and do, whatever biology determines, whatever that is, right? And so it goes, even though they seem kind of, if one is good, the other one is bad. It's actually both are bad, because they're both extremes. You really don't explain anything about the human condition, which is kind of complicated. Obviously, we have neurons and they learn, but people also have feelings, and when the feelings don't coincide with what they think the world should be, then they leave or they fight and so on. So it's not obviously tabula rasa, but at the same time it's not biological determinism, because we have neurons, and those neurons do adapt, and so it's somewhere in between. What meets the eye versus deep thought. So again, the idea of not being able to see something and still extract some information using probability, like Bayesian thinking, using statistics, using logic, classic logic of syllogisms, like what Socrates did, is an idea, an ancient idea of how to extract information about things that we cannot see. So what meets the eye versus deep thought. What meets the eye is knowledge that you can verify with your perceptions, and deep thought is, the things you can derive from incomplete information, because everything is incomplete. We have a determined, limited range of things we can see with our eyes, because it has a certain angle, unlike the dragonfly, because we are limited by our very limbs. We cannot go outside our very own limitations. For example, if I run the maximum speed that I can run for 1 minute is okay. For 30 minutes, my heart would be completely destroyed. So we have limits, and those keeping ourselves in those limits is a survival instinct. Okay, going against that is wrong, but also not trying hard is also wrong. So it's about a balancing. And then there's the noble savage theory, which is that the ancient, actually before the ancients, not in the Bronze Age, but actually before that, like let's say the Neolithic period and the the Chalcolithic and so on. So those were ancient, very old times where people, might have not engaged in so much war, because we didn't have agriculture, we hadn't accumulated grains that then served as a basis for sedentarism, and then served a basis for currency, and then the currency for fungibility, like exchanging different things, commercial things, through money, and then that accumulation of money would lead to power and military power, to invasions and so on. So that's the noble savage theory, and it's kind of it has a point, a valid point, but also it's exaggerated in its way, in the way that they categorize people. And also remember that different people had different outputs, different cultures. Just to remind people that 100,000 years ago, they tried to traverse the Levant, what was called the crescent, the Fertile Crescent, from Eastern Africa to the north, right, towards Turkey, let's say, modern day Anatolia. And what happened is that they might have fought some Neanderthals, and they perished. They didn't, or they went back to their origin. But in 70,000 years ago, they actually managed to stay there, and from there, 50,000 years ago, they went to Europe, and 50,000 years ago to actually 40,000 years ago. So it's actually more recent in the immigration to Europe, then to China and so on. And obviously creating different groups and different valleys and different places around the river. So it's difficult anthropologically speaking, it's difficult to really assure that we had, a very smooth relationship in those times, just because we didn't have ways into accumulating commercial power. So also an idea that's not very not valued, unfortunately, but should be valued again. I shouldn't be prescriptive, but different degree enough to change category. So if you have, for example, ambition, I hear it all the time, especially with free marketer, American free marketers, right? Like these people that say that greed is good. I mean, what kind of horrible people are these? Whoever works for these people are kind of, I don't know, slavish, right? So ambition is good because the connotation is that it's good, right? So you're ambitious because you want to learn stuff, and you keep reading, you keep informing yourself, you create stuff, you fail, you learn the lessons, etc. That's ambition. And greed, it means you're hurting somebody else, or you're hurting yourself in the process. You don't sleep more than 6 hours, and you get a cancer in your liver or whatever. And you went too far, so that's greed. So the amount of ambition can be so high that it creates something negative. Then it changes category. So we don't use categorically. We don't use greed anymore. We don't use ambition, the word ambition anymore. We use greed because it denotes excess. And you try to discuss that with people, and they're, oh no, it's relative. They go to postmodernism, right? Relative stuff. Like, oh no, but for you it's too much. For us, it's So that's how immoral people work. It's they always trying to change the goalpost and change the different ways in which they define the terms. Confidence to compensate for competence, right? So you see these people, in podiums and talking greatly about stuff, and you just realize if you were to ask them anything, they would be incapable of answering. I mean, like people on the internet, on YouTube, that they speak 10 languages, but they speak because they have a script. Can you have a conversation in 10 languages? Then it changes. Then they can only have a conversation in 3 of them or 4 of them, right? So it's better to be humble and show less confidence and be sincere. Instead of saying, I speak 10 languages, you can say, I can say a script, can announce a script in 10 languages, which is different to speaking 10 languages. So we can go on and on. Politicians talking BS about whatever they say, and they always, pump their sentences with things that have no bearing in reality. And this is Confucius, the great Confucius. Okay, so this is when he says, 1 makes 3. If I give you 1, you can infer the other 2. And the great Socrates, right? Socrates got killed because he was a critical thinker. I mean, it's amazing that somebody like him would be killed by his own people, his own Athenians, because he started to criticize Athenians for not seeing the value in the Thessalonians. I don't remember which city they were in war with at that time. But they had an enemy, and he said, this people, the enemies also have some good qualities, and we should maybe absorb some of those ideas because they're nice. That was considered perverting the youth. Okay, and also he pissed a lawyer back then because he stopped him in the street and he told him, I seem then in just this little thing to be wiser than this man at any rate. That what I do not know, I do not think I know either. So he stopped him and he started to ask questions, and the lawyer, who was an educated person back then, rare, right? Because it was ancient Greece, even though it was a great civilization, it still was scarce in its, intellectual developments. And this guy, who was supposed to be super smart, a lawyer, know the laws of ancient Greece, answered questions that shouldn't have been answered by him because he didn't know about the topics. And so Socrates would have said, I don't know. But this guy started to talk just to sound cool, to give a fake confidence, and then, maybe get a higher rank in the hierarchy of ancient Athens. Who knows? And so this was the criticism of Socrates, and of course it got him killed because, nobody likes, the ancient, civilizations, let alone modern ones, like criticisms that indicate weakness. And he also placed himself as maybe that was a lesson he learned, but too late, that he placed himself above other people, and that seemed arrogant, and that got him into trouble. But that wasn't even his point. His point wasn't even that he was great. The point was that the lawyer was stupid, right? He thought he was great. The lawyer thought he was great, and he said, no, the lawyer is not great. It's just that I'm better because, I realize that I'm very stupid. I mean, I'm very limited. And by saying I'm very limited, I'm actually wiser. That was his entire point. But they didn't get it because, they were dunces, even in ancient Greece. Yeah, building whatever the fuck, but it's still philosophically retarded. And so Plato said, Plato is also an excellent philosopher. However, he used to say that, sophists can, sophism can sometimes be used, and I'll get into the details of sophism later, but it's basically using logic to seem logical, but in reality, it's you're just playing the archers, pointing at the archer's philosophy, right? They're pointing at something and then hitting it with point accuracy, right? And that's the way that the archers work. Kind of finding any way to prove their point as opposed to learn from discourse. And but apart from that, I don't understand why he would support something like that. Maybe to win adepts or whatever. He did realize something incredibly important, which is something expressed also in Plato's Cave, which is that a man shackled on the feet would stay on in a cave and only see the outer wall being projected with shadows of people passing in front of a bonfire. And so what he said basically is that, picking up the essence of it, is that people that would live in that cave and would be shackled in it would only see shadows, and the shadows and the people outside of the cave walking in front of the bonfire wouldn't be something that they could even fathom. For them, only shadows exist, right? And so he said clearly that those who are able to see beyond the shadows and lies of their culture will never be understood, let alone believed by the masses. So he was kind of a pessimistic, and rightly so, because he had seen how his own teacher Socrates had been killed by the very people that he he used to engage in discussions with. Wasn't understood, right? And so the culture creates this kind of blindness that doesn't allow individuals without these logical abilities to see. And so they only perceive, but they cannot see beyond what they perceive, which is what cognitive abilities should provide, right, to the intelligent person. And this is what the main idea, I think, is the most important one that Plato ever said. And so going back to culture, what does society value, right? And also, can it be measured? So different cultures value different things. So if it's a very materialistic culture, maybe the well-being of people are not is not so valued, but the materialistic gains, maybe for the upper classes, is what is focused. And so it's an example of mismatch. For example, there's a person that wants to make people more intelligent by passing on the wisdom of ancient times or the present times and pass it to the next generation. While other people might say, oh no, the objective of life is making the highest amount of money. Right? So there's a mismatch, right? And so people that have that mismatch will not work well together. And then there's cynicism, right? They're it's extremely contagious and dangerous because it means that you cannot trust people, and then the only way you can trust is by giving in to commercial ideas. Like, for example, oh yeah, I can commercialize with that person, but I wouldn't sleep in a place near where that person is because he might stab me while I sleep or something like that, right? And so everything is up for grabs. The idea that you can go and take anything because it's yours or something like that. So it's also not predetermined, and this is anti-conspiracism, right? Also, nobody's in charge, really, if you think about it, because all the laws and all the governments and all these ideas about control, for example, a car that has a steering system might not work perfectly, or the police might not catch all the criminals. So this is anti-conspiracism, because conspiracism leads you to believe that they control everything, right? Governments control everything, right? In reality, it's the opposite. I mean, nobody's controlling anything. It's so fluffy and so not solid, not applied, that it looks more like anarchy, actually. Nobody's in charge. And so this is the great David Foster Wallace, right? Which says something extremely similar to what Plato said. There are these two young fish swimming along, and they happen to meet an older fish swimming the other way, who nods at them and says, "Morning, boys. How's the water?" And the two young fish swim on for a bit, and then eventually one of them looks over at the other one and goes, "What the hell is water?" And so this is, again, Plato's idea of, culture blinds people into what actually is happening. The same way that, at some point in ancient times, people start to talk about air and auras and, abstract ideas that they couldn't put their finger on. And so they started to base all their knowledge on crap. Things that they couldn't possibly test scientifically. And what happened is that, a lot of religions come from that, and a lot of superstition comes from that. But it's worse than that. Like, if you tell somebody, for example, in ancient Egypt, that they don't have to be the slaves of the pharaoh, they would look at you like, what are you talking about? This is how society works, right? I gotta serve, and otherwise I get my whip lashes on my back, right? It's how it works. And if I try to escape, I'm gonna die in the desert, right? Trying to escape because there's no water, I'm gonna die dehydrated. So it's hard to make people see things that have already been inculcated to them from the very beginning, and it becomes a habit. And this is what David Foster Wallace was talking about. And we have, of course, the excellent idea, I'm being sarcastic, figure of speech, for those of you that cannot get figures of speech. It's bloodletting, okay? So this is a technique that was used by people that call themselves doctors, but today we will call them quacks. And you can see kind of creepy, just kind of gross, gory image of a man being bled to take away the bad spirits, because some people believe that if they took away some bad spirits, they would take away also the illness. And so again, the lack of imagination. So people try to, like this is a fallacy, the fallacy of the false cause. They only give one cause or two causes to something that could have millions of causes, and that is just showing lack of an imagination, lack of brainstorming, and so on. So nothingness, there's nothing, as a great film and also book by Michael Ende and The Never-Ending Story would say, nothingness is destroying fantastica. Imagination more important than knowledge. So that was what Einstein said about how to imagine atoms in the universe. He was talking about physics, but you can apply it to almost anything, even for art. Inferiority complexes, like what I just said, like people with confidence are the ones that show a lot of confidence, are the ones that probably have the highest amount of inferiority complex, because they don't have any talents, so they have to pretend to have them. Stupidity more dangerous than malice. So again, the doctor that I showed you, do you think that he's malicious? I don't think so. Maybe he's a sadist. We don't know. But I think he just applied things that were habitual back then, and it's just the way things are. Again, the slave not admitting that maybe he could be free in ancient Egypt. This doctor, not admitting that maybe bleeding people actually takes away the white blood cells, right? That would attack the illness, and instead of helping, he's actually depleting the resources of the body to attack the illness. Of course, this is easy for me to say it because I didn't live in those times. But again, I don't think that those people would, even today, would be critical thinkers. And then again, reassuring lie versus uncomfortable truth. Like when people say that, something that they know there's a lie, but it's kind of nice to say it, right? Like for example, there are no scammers. Oh, I wish there were no scammers, but there are there, and I don't know why the police doesn't do anything for them. Maybe there are not enough spots in a jail. And then embellishment of horrible actions or attitudes through pretty words. That's what George Orwell would also say, right, about 1984 and the farm animals and all that. All those. I haven't read them, by the way, but I read a lot about it. And so they sugarcoat horrible things. Like for example, they called the party, which was the only party in that world in 1984, I think it was, said that called the Truth Department or something like that, for a department that was constantly propagating propaganda, lies to people so that they want to rebel and things like that. Degrading of honorable actions or attitudes. So, for example, not being a womanizer, right? It's being, I don't know, asexual or something like that. I don't know. And so that's the kind of the people that use it. This kind of they have internalized these ideas of very terrible things being given great names, and very nice things being given horrible names, which is a equivocation fallacy in this case, being done intentionally. Okay, now we have the list of fallacies, which is what causes horror to me, that people don't keep relying on them over and over. And that's survivorship bias. I'm going to give you a quick review because this is obviously not a course on fallacies, on logic. These are informal fallacies. In general, they have to be they are fallacious in the form, right? Oh no, sorry, not in the form, in the way that they are presented in the premises and then conclusion, so that it doesn't lead to the conclusion. Survivor bias is, well, that's not a fallacy, that's a bias. It means that people will not take into consideration the things that they cannot see, what I've been telling you about. Then cherry picking, grabbing the examples that prove their point. This is the archer doing, proving their point, that they choose the things that, with the arch, right, and the bow and arrow, they point at the things that would benefit them, but then they ignore the rest, right? Which is very biased, right? Psychological projection. This is kind of a psychological issue, I suppose, where it was talked by Freud and the other psychologists, the initial psychologists in the 20th century of United States, I think. They said that a lot of people project, that is, that they attribute their own defects to other people, but it can also be virtue. So, for example, if you're a good person, you cannot fathom that another person can, for example, steal at the back of of the person that trusted them, for example, or psychological projection of being imprudent, for example, being riding at the a provincial road at 100 kilometers per hour, and then saying to another person that they are the ones that ride at 100 kilometers in a road, on a provincial road. Then there's the ad hominem. Ad hominem is, don't discuss, just attack the person that is discussing. Guilt by association is associate a person with a group that actually doesn't, to which he or she doesn't actually belong to, but that might have one idea of the millions of other ideas that is actually that with which they both agree, the group and the person. So typically, the typical example is I don't know, people that mistreat pets use leashes. Okay, Maria uses a leash, so therefore she's a pet abuser. Okay, that's stupid. Okay, but that's a guilt by association. Strawman argument is also very common, unfortunately, and it's a twist. Like again, the archer doing the bad stuff. They twist the argument, the original argument of their opponents or their rivals or whatever, and they try to oversimplify it or create an entire different argument that is easier to attack because it's more detestable, right? Whataboutism, that's another one, very common, unfortunately, and it's it's kind of like, oh, everybody's a sinner, so you cannot complain. So imagine a world of whataboutism, a world about with whataboutism. There are no jails because you cannot convict anybody. Everybody is a sinner, right? So if you steal something, you cannot. The police cannot arrest you because he has also stolen, and so he has that experience. He cannot possibly have the moral ground to arrest you. So and since everybody's like that nobody can arrest you, so there are no jails, right? So it's clearly a fallacy, but also it's kind of dangerous if you think about it. That they cannot measure, again, the equivocation fallacy, and also the moral equivalence fallacy. We will see later. Moral equivalence fallacy is that maybe you stole when you were a 5-year-old kid a gum, and you equate that with a 30-year-old that should know better, right? Stealing a car, even when he has a job and doesn't need it. So morally it's not the same, but what about is an equivocation fallacy? They will come pretty much close. Contextonomy, again, the context, they isolate the idea, and then if you don't put it into context, then it doesn't make any sense. So that's a fallacy that takes the context as, or the lack of context as an advantage. Generally, the lack of context. Then the naturalistic fallacy, it's natural, so therefore it's good, right? No, wait, if a bee bites you, it's not good. It kind of harms your skin and your circulatory system. And then the opposite of it is moralistic fallacy. So just because something should be that way doesn't mean that it is. Remember the difference between prescriptive and descriptive language is the same here. The naturalistic would be the descriptive one, and moralistic fallacy would be the prescriptive one, the normative one. And so just because something should be that way. So for example, just because the world has airplane accidents, just because the world shouldn't have airplane accidents doesn't mean that there aren't, right? Here there is an example of a military drawing of a ship, of an airplane. And initially the soldiers thought that the places where the airplane had received the shots from machine guns on Earth, on land, were indicators of the places where they should shield them more. In reality, this is the survivorship bias example, because it's the opposite, right? These are the ones that survive, that arrive to the base, the military base, which means that they, despite the bullets hitting all those spots, they still manage to arrive. So if you really think about it again, even without taking into consideration the survivorship bias, just the points where there are no bullets clearly indicate, like in the middle there is the tank. The circle over here is a tank. The gas tank is where the gasoline is. If a bullet arrives there and pokes a hole in it, then the airplane wouldn't have any gasoline and would have to pick down into an accident. The same with the turbines. The turbines are here, left and right one. If one of them was damaged and didn't have an emergency turbine, it would fall, obviously. And also the pilot, where the pilot is. If the pilot would receive a bullet, it'd probably die, and then or be so severely damaged that he wouldn't be able to pilot the airplane, and then would crash. And of course, that's what actually happened is that they realized they had committed a fallacy, so they wasted a lot of time when they shielded the parts that had been shot. So it was the exact opposite. They had to reinforce the pilot zone, the pilot cabins outside, the turbines, and the near the tank of the gasoline. And so then there are a lot of fallacies, like the homunculus fallacy, the religious one, which is religious people use it all the time. If you ask somebody, hey, how does that phone work? Oh, there are many little small people that make it work and send the pixels, and then go and travel the speed of light, and then come back here with information, and then they display a message on your cell phone. That's the homunculus fallacy. That's not how it works. They're not little people that make things work. Actually, it's just very complicated technology, like radio signaling, LCD displays, and so on. So that's and the religious people use this fallacy, but they say, oh, it's God, or it's the way things are, and it's the will of God, or if it's something bad, the will of evil devil, whatever. So then there's the moving goalpost, which is you have a post, right? You have a goal, sorry, and yeah, like the place you wanna goal into, and you say, oh no, that was not it. It was another one. It was more farther ahead, or to the left, or to the right. So, for example, one of the objectives of education is making critical thinkers. And then you say, okay, so let them read whatever they want, so they can develop their own skills. And then the person responds, oh, no, because that would make them brainwashed with shitty, radical thinkers that then would destroy society. Hey, wait, you just said that you want critical thinkers, and then you say, oh, no, because that would lead to radical thinkers. So you move the goalpost, right? Nirvana fallacy. That's very common, unfortunately, and it's also the one that was used in the coronavirus pandemic. Right, it's still used, which is that if the vaccines don't work perfectly, why would you want to use them? Well, maybe they work 80% of the time is still more than 0%, right? Even if it doesn't work 100%, it works 80% of the time. So saying that it's not enough is the nirvana fallacy. It's still better than zero. Sweeping generalization, synecdoche. So when you say something like these two people are aggressive, okay, and then you say, oh, these are from this ethnicity, therefore all people of that ethnicity are aggressive, is a sweeping generalization. It's also called racism. And then there's synecdoche, but the synecdoche is a figure of speech, which means that you have to put it into context, right? If you're using it as a synecdoche, it means that you're saving time, not explaining the details. So if you to refer to the White House, okay, instead of saying the government, the U.S. government, federal government, you say the White House. That's the synecdoche. So from the little to the big, or to the big to the little. In this case, sweeping generalization is from the little to the big. Fallacy of relative privation, that's another one, very common, and it's similar to whataboutism. It's not as bad as. So, for example, again, you say that you're going 100 kilometers per hour in a provincial road, and you're not supposed to go that fast because there are a lot of curves. You don't know what's ahead, and you say, "Oh, yeah, but you can't tell me because you were." Riding the car at 105 kilometers per hour in a near a school or whatever. So that's not as bad as yeah, he was wrong at doing that 105 kilometers per hour near a school, but you're also wrong at 100 kilometers in a provincial road. So one doesn't lead to invalidate the other. And then there's the ad populum, okay, also unfortunately, extremely popular. And it's that, what they used to tell you when you were a kid, don't follow what other people do. If other people throw themselves out of a pit, would you do it? And the answer is, hopefully, if you're not suicidal, no, right? You don't do it what other people. If other people smoke, will you do it? No, right? Because even if you want to belong to the group, maybe you shouldn't belong to a group because the group is not healthy, right? And also, secondhand smoking is extremely unhealthy. Some say that it's even worse than first-hand smoking. And so, ad populum is a way to appeal to the popularity of something. Everybody does it, so you should also do it. Moral equivalence fallacy. Nobody's perfect, right? This is extremely common, unfortunately. And yeah, it's again similar to what I just the examples I give about doing something wrong and say, oh yeah, but it's the same as that other thing you did. It's like, no. It's not the same equivalence. Okay, some of them are worse than others. Like, for example, in the case of murder, there are different degrees of severity. So I think it's manslaughter, the one that is when a person gets extremely angry and does it. Then the worst one is first-degree murder, I think, when the person plans about it. So it's not an attack or an emotional impetus, but it's actually planned. So it's more Machiavellical. That one is the worst one. I think they get a full time sentence, and then the one that has the less impact, and maybe they can even go free if they can prove that it was for self-defense or defense of loved ones. That's self-defense, and they can be liberated because they had no other option. And so it's not the same, right? Self-defense is morally acceptable. The other ones are deplorable. False cause fallacy is a fallacy where what I was saying previously, the cause of something, of an effect, can be multiple. I mean, it can be millions of ideas that can cause something. For example, a car doesn't work. Doesn't mean that it's not. It doesn't have gasoline. That might be one of the causes, but it may be that the steering system doesn't work. It doesn't steer to the left, or the brake system doesn't work, or the window is broken and the air comes when you go fast and it can blind you and you have to use glasses and it's too dangerous, so they decide not to use it. So there are a lot of causes. And to say that it's because of one cause, like not having gasoline, is a fallacy. And so, unfortunately, when it comes to fallacies and biases, people just don't tend to listen. And this is what Thomas Paine said. I think he was a writer. He said, to argue with a person that has renounced logic is like giving a dead person medicine, right? It's a waste of time, basically. And unfortunately, some people are like that. Like what I was saying about Donald Knuth. Donald Knuth is a genius, but in terms of 3D visualization in his mind is he's incapable. So some people are just incapable of logic, incapable of deriving knowledge from things that they cannot perceive. Logic again, inference, deduction, induction, Bayesian thinking, and so on. And so the person is left with a dilemma, to do it or not to do it. If you do it, you're faced with serious dangers, and you have seen people fail at it many, many times, but you don't let those feelings get into you because you want to progress. And this is an excellent scene of the never-ending story where the hero is challenged by looking at very slow probability of passing through by looking at a lot of corpses of previous failed attempts of people that previously had attempted to cross over that gate. And of course, part of the lesson is to not hesitate, right? And he actually manages to dodge the lasers that these creatures, these statues with powers have throw at the passersby. And what happens is that I think this is also an excellent metaphor of how even though society presents a lot of dangers and a lot of people fail at stuff, doesn't mean that the person in question thinking about this will also fail. And this is kind of a heroic idea, a warrior of a fight that many have previously lost, right? And you can see the corpses on the floor, and he still decides to go for the battle, right? Because it's what he was made to do. It's his destiny. And again, there are golden rules for life, and the golden rules are do this, do that. Honor your parents. What are the other things that the Hebrew Bible tells you in the covenant? Those are golden rules. Do something, right? And the silver rules are don't do something. So omit something, right? So for example, don't steal, don't kill, right? So the silver rules tend to be better because that's where the best silver rule for morality is, which is don't do to others what you wouldn't want to be done, what you wouldn't want be done to you. It's a way of saying that people tend to have the same preferences for things that they don't like, while the things that they like are a little bit more personal. And common sense and insight, it's something that unfortunately is not so common. Common sense is not so common, and insight is rare, because you got to think in a world where immediate gratification and shiny, colorful stuff appear and distract you. Is more you have to have more discipline to stay focused on the things that matter. And against the current, again against the grain, the salmon example. The salmon is my favorite animal because it sacrifices itself, and risks a lot of stuff, and I think it even turns out to die at the end of the road against the current of the river, because he wants, or she, it's a female salmon, right? Wants its eggs to have a higher possibility of survival in a very precarious world, in hostile world of predators. And you can see here the salmons swimming against the current for the sake of their offspring. And then there's the unspoken hero, right? The idea that somebody has sacrificed so much and it's not recognized. So there's a lot of cynicism. Oh no, that person isn't doing it for the community, he's doing it for himself, right? And then there's social punishment, like it's a psychological punishment for being good, right? Which kind of surprises, because societies wouldn't exist without some kind of trust. And then everybody that tried has failed against the odds, like that dude, climbing up the ladder of corpses that have failed already. and still keep faith is a heroic act. Uh, Again, I'm not saying anything specific about failing or about this kind of gloomy idea, but is to say, there might be some heroic acts that people are not realizing, and the pure among the sinners also. The idea that there's a person that behaves well among a lot of people that don't behave well. The people that are sinner, right, that don't behave well, are going to, well, project again the psychological projection, because they behave badly. That person over there is not the one exception. He is just like us, right? And so, kind of also disappointing for a person. Good heart, or a good apple among rotten apples. The only option is to emigrate or go somewhere else where the behaviors are not so bad. And so solace, whatever causes people to receive solace, like inspiration from ethereal sources, music, art, or even scientific inquiry, can all lead to some kind of coming to terms with life, right? And even though there's darkness, there's always a light somewhere that people can point to and direct themselves to. And so, in terms of again education, people, especially in some social networks, and tend to say that, oh, reading many books is good. Now, while reading many books can lead you to explore different minds and different people's ideas, you still have to, take a stance and still decide what's good to point at. And if you just read randomly without any criteria, then you just waste your time. So, and also people don't aim at understanding; they aim at quantity, not quality. And you have to think about it, and you have to experiment with what was written, and that takes much more time than just reading the books, right? And so, the null hypothesis in scientific inquiry is the humble idea that you have to disprove what you just said. Okay, so you have to debunk your own theory, and so you assume that it's wrong, and you want to prove that it's wrong. And when you have taken a lot of time to prove that it's wrong and you're not able to for a long time, then it means it's a solid hypothesis. It can become a theory, like gravity, for example. It's not been disproven, so we just assume that it's not going to be disproved, because a lot of people have tried and they haven't succeeded for decades. But really, no theory is ever absolutely proved. It's just unproven for a long time. Assumptions are to be taken into account before continuing with study. So if you're studying, for example, anything, I don't know, the currents of the physics of the currents of rivers, very complicated, by the way. So fluid physics, basically. There are assumptions about the density. Maybe you're talking about water. Maybe there are fish there. There are clams and whatnot. So those assumptions are important, because if you don't take that into account, you're not talking about the same thing. And also, what are the objectives, right? So, people tend to confuse objectives with logic, or morality and philosophy with logic, and you can be a perfectly or extremely intelligent person, but with really decadent objectives. And so again, I post to you the what do these four people have in common, and well, I'll give you one example, and then you can still think about, brainstorm about what other possibilities are there that they still have in common. So what they have in common is that they are all talking about more or less the same things, about societal collapse and bad ideas and nonconformism, really, and that reality isn't as simple as the perception the perception of that our senses give us might suggest. So there's more to it than that. And so even though they actually three different topics they all talk about in general, like the anthropological dilemma of living, and what is wise to do in a world of complex interactions. So this is in general, right? But they're good at logic, and they're good at history. They talk a lot about ancient stuff, and they don't underestimate the wisdom derived from ancient studies, even anthropological ones. And these are the things that I will talk in the rest of the presentation. But I think I already talked too much, and I think I'll leave it until this point, and then I'll expand because it's humongous and there are so many things to talk about. But I already spoke, I don't know, 40 minutes at least, and I hope you enjoyed it. And any questions, you can leave it on the comment section. Although I think I won't receive many views because I don't even promote this. But it's something that I obviously like to talk about, and it's for free for everybody to watch. Thanks for listening. See you around.